Hello and welcome to the programme. We're starting in the United States, where Washington has summoned Russia's ambassador after a Russian jet fighter collided with an American drone over the Black Sea. Now, the US military's European command says that the Russian fighter plane struck the propeller of the unmanned US aircraft, causing it to crash. President Biden has been briefed about the incident, and this appears to be the worst publicly acknowledged US-Russian confrontation since the invasion of Ukraine more than a year ago. The Pentagon says US Defense Department officials have not spoken with Russian officials so far about the incident, and we've just heard from Pentagon Press Secretary Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder in just the last few minutes.
At approximately 7:03 a.m. Central European Time, one of the Russian Su-27 aircraft struck the propeller of the MQ-9, causing U.S. forces to have to bring the MQ-9 down in international waters. Several times before the collision, the Su-27s dumped fuel on and flew in front of the MQ-9 in a reckless and unprofessional manner. This incident demonstrates a lack of competence in addition to being unsafe and unprofessional.
So that was the Pentagon Press Secretary, Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder. He was speaking within the past few minutes. And for all of our viewers who are joining us now in the UK, we'll bring you some of the details of what was said. Let's cross over to Washington. The BBC's Gary O'Donoghue joins us live now. Gary, for our international viewers, we were watching that press conference, that briefing. For our UK viewers, let's just bring them up to date with what we know about this incident, which the US are describing as reckless.
So what we know so far that is at about 6 o'clock this morning UK time, that two Russian fighters came into contact with an American unmanned surveillance aircraft over what the Americans say was international waters in the Black Sea. Now, these drones, as they're sometimes called, conduct effectively spying missions, but Americans insist it was over international water. Now, what seems to have happened is that one of these Russian planes collided or struck the drone, damaging its propeller, and the Americans had to then bring their aircraft down into the sea. Now, we've been learning some fascinating detail in the last few minutes. It seems that this encounter between these two Su-27, these pretty old Russian planes, and this drone went on for about 30 or 40 minutes. And the Americans said that they flew in front of the drone, that they apparently dumped fuel on top of it as well, presumably to try and sort of disorient the drone, etc., before this collision took place and the drone had to be brought down. Now, as far as we know, or the Pentagon is saying at the moment, there's been no contact with Russia's military on this. We do know that the State Department here in Washington have summoned the ambassador Anatoly Antonov to an audience. That's a pretty stiff diplomatic measure. It might not sound like much, but that's what happens when countries have serious diplomatic problems with one another. And we're learning more details. We're also promised by the Pentagon perhaps some imagery of what happened in this collision over the Black Sea. They said they're going through the process of declassification, so we may get some stills, we may get some video of what actually happened later on.
OK, Gary, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Really appreciate that. Gary O'Donoghue, my colleague there in Washington, just on giving us an update of what the Pentagon Press Secretary was describing there, the US describing the Russian pilot's actions as unsafe. In the past half hour, Russia's defense ministry has said that its fighter jets did not come into contact with the US drone, claiming instead that it crashed due to what it described as sharp manoeuvring. Well, Christine Berzina, Managing Director of the German Marshall Fund think tank, gave us her reaction to this.
Well, we haven't had an incident like this in this particular war, and we've had a lot of deconfliction in previous scenarios. So it's really a notable moment where the question is, does this conflict lead to direct confrontation between the United States or between a NATO country and Russia? So much of it has, this entire conflict, this war, has been Ukraine with NATO weapons with US weapons, and Russia on the other side. And this takes it one step further. We thought we were in a similar position potentially last November when there was a Russian, what was thought to be a potentially Russian missile landing in Poland on Polish territory and killing 2 people. And so that turned out not to be the case, and probably air defense systems. But there's this sense that there's a perilous moment in which you could have direct confrontation, and what would that mean? On the other hand, there have been direct confrontations between Turkish, also a NATO state, and Russian jets. So in 2015, Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet that violated its airspace, and yet there wasn't war between NATO and Russia over that. And it's very difficult in these situations to say, well, what will be the next step? What are the cool heads that prevail? What counts as potentially escalatory and what doesn't? And it's good that so many hours have passed and we are where we are, which means that it's there is reason, there are consultations, there are still paths to conversation during this war.
So as we know, as we started the programme, Washington has summoned Russia's ambassador. We'll have much more on this in around 20 minutes' time when we'll be talking to Michael Clarke. He's the former head of the Royal United Services Institute, which is a UK-based security think tank. So we'll get much more analysis on that.